This video is sponsored by KEH Camera, and if you're interested in any of the things I'm talking about today, you can support the channel by clicking on the links below. So if you follow the channel for any length of time, you've probably seen me talk about medium format cameras. I've done videos about sort of whether they're worth it or not, and done reviews on the Hasselblad X1D2, the 907X, the GFX50R, the GFX50S2, and actually even comparing it to the GFX50S. But as I was sort of prepping for a wedding this weekend and other weddings I have coming up, I realized that I actually had never done a video on the GFX50S itself. So today I'm going to talk about why, after going through all of those different cameras, why this is the one that I actually landed on, and hopefully give you a good idea of whether or not maybe it's something that you might want to pick up in the future. So the thing about medium format is, for a long time, all of the digital backs and everything were incredibly expensive, and you can still find very, very expensive ones from Hasselblad in their, H67D series, whatever those things are. It's so far out of my price range that I literally don't even look at them because there's just no way I could ever afford it. But when this particular sensor came out a few years back, it started going into the Fujifilm cameras, into the Pentax cameras, and into the Hasselblad cameras. And obviously there's a great deal why. Having a larger sensor, this one in particular is a 44 by 33 sensor and comes in at 50 megapixels, hence the 50S naming here. 50 megapixels on a sensor that is this size is just going to be a lot higher quality and give you a lot more depth and information and dynamic range than something else that is much smaller. But at the current moment, I think the biggest thing about this camera is it is more accessible and more approachable because it is significantly less expensive than most of the other options out there, and can provide you with something that most other full frame cameras just can't, especially at the price point. So when I go and photograph weddings, I am very, very rarely using this as a primary camera. I kind of use it as a camera that I sprinkle in some photos throughout the day. I also find that when I do bring this, having it for the family groupings and some of the formal photos works really well. The sensor is also a 4x3 sensor. So having a 4x3 is something that I really appreciate because, coming from the world of weddings, I would say probably 90% of the photos I take on this camera are actually vertical images. So I'm just using the full sensor, I'm not cropping anything, and I'm getting that 4x3 aspect ratio directly out of the camera, where I often use other cameras and crop to that aspect ratio when I deliver to clients and post online. So what I'll say as well is the depth that you get out of this, especially when using a lens like this Mitacon 65 1.4, it's not the sharpest lens in the world, but that's another reason why doing portraits and things like that work really well. And then you get that extra pop at 1.4 on a much larger sensor. So there's just a lot to that. also say the files out of here have good dynamic range, and they just have that special look where, if I'm being honest, sometimes I feel like the APS-C cameras from Fujifilm lack, I guess, like the depth that this can bring. And it's not only the depth of field, but the way that the focus falls off and the way the colors transition. I have just found that editing the photos out of this is a much easier experience than doing so on the other APS-C cameras from Fujifilm. The other thing I like about it is just the general ergonomics. It is bulky, for sure. It has a protuberance, as Michael Scott would say, from the back of the camera here that is sort of reminiscent of a 645 film back. So I honestly don't mind it. And the camera overall is actually pretty lightweight. The grip is good. It fits my hands really well, and you can definitely hold it very steady. And then one of the other things that I've always been drawn to about Fujifilm cameras is that they definitely don't feel like you're shooting film necessarily, but this is one of the ones that does bring me a little bit more into that feeling, both because the camera is a little bit slower, and we'll get into the cons, I guess, of that. I just love having my whole exposure triangle literally in a triangle right here. There are also a ton of custom buttons. There is, a blank custom button here, a blank custom button here. All of this little D-pad thing does not have any markings, so you can customize those. And there's even a button right here. So if you need to quickly, as you're photographing things, change some sort of setting, that is also available. I have this button in particular set up to be my focus magnification button, because since I am doing everything manually focusing, I can just tap that button. It will zoom me in all the way to 100%, and then I can basically know whether or not my subject is in focus. Obviously, this only really works when the subject is stationary, but it's still a nice feature, especially if I just want to double check my focus. Another fantastic thing about this camera is this back screen. The screens in general are what I would consider a con on this camera as well, but this particular functionality is something I really, really enjoy. You have the ability on this back screen to flip it up like this, which is great because then you get that kind of waist level viewfinder if you want to shoot lower and have that kind of experience, which is something that I have done in the past and really enjoy. But then, as I've mentioned here, I use this camera almost exclusively vertically like this. So all of the portraits and things, I'm taking almost every photo with this camera is vertical. You not only have this ability, but you have the ability to pop this up and open it like that, which if you are going to be focusing and framing a shot at a lower angle vertically, I can actually see the screen and I don't have to worry about it. While it's not a flip screen like many other cameras are, if you're not gonna have a flip screen, this is just about the best setup that I can see. And it's not the most confidence-inducing setup in the world, but I've had it and sort of like used the camera quite a bit and have had zero issues with any reliability there. The other thing is that it has just a bunch of other professional ports and options. Another thing that typically is not great about Fujifilm cameras is their battery life, but this battery is enormous. And I have two of them, and even at weddings where I use them much more heavily, I've never run out of batteries, and that has just been great. And the last thing that I obviously really, really love about this camera is just the way that it is modular for the way that I do things. The sensor on here works really, really well in adapting other lenses. I've done plenty of videos about adapting lenses to it. The reason why this sensor in particular is a lot better than some of the other options out there is because it actually does have a physical shutter. The sensor readout in this camera is just not that great, but the shutter actually going over the sensor allows it to stop all of that movement, and then you're not just moving through and reading everything out, which gives you all of that rolling shutter effect that you can definitely get pretty easily with the Hasselblad cameras that I've adapted onto. And then clearly, this is a much, much, much smaller setup. And another way that I have often done this is the viewfinder here is actually removable, but then this converts down into a size that's much more like the Hasselblad 907X. It's kind of like the middle class version of it, because you get this and you can pop it on and give that kind of like waist level viewfinder. It's not exactly the smallest thing in the world, but using a really, really small Leica M mount lens like this, it actually covers the sensor well, and it's going to vignette and things, but maybe I'm the only person that's ever adapted the 35 Ultron onto a GFX. So you're going to get some pretty unique and interesting images by trying out stuff like this. So you can definitely get into this camera for a relatively inexpensive way in comparison to some other things. And because this camera has been out for a while and many people have sold off their cameras or are selling them to get maybe the 50S2 or the 100 or the 100S, and they're usually fairly readily available, especially at places like KEH, which is the sponsor of this video. Now, I have been using KEH for far longer than I've had any association with them, and they are legitimately the place that I send all of my peers and friends and family to buy their used gear online. And the thing about buying things online, especially if you may not be a camera expert, there's a lot of things that you may not know to look for, and that's why buying something from a place like KEH is somewhere I definitely trust and have trusted throughout the years to give me a camera that is far more conservatively graded than I would anticipate. Anytime that I've bought from KEH, I have legitimately done so with confidence because they have a great return policy and they have a really, really good warranty, which is something obviously just not gonna get if you are doing the normal private sale thing online. So if you're interested in this camera or any of the other medium formats, definitely jump into the description down below and I'll pin a comment with this camera as well as some of my other favorite options for this. So thanks so much again to KEH for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel. Now, there are a few things that I definitely don't like about the camera, and mainly they come down to just the fact that it is a little bit older and doesn't necessarily have the newest technology in a few different departments. The main thing just being the sensor readout as well as the viewfinders here. They're just not that high of resolution, and focusing on them with either focus peaking or just looking through without that is a pretty difficult experience, if I'm being honest. There's also a pretty decent amount of blackout. So when you're taking photos, it takes a while, even with fast memory cards. The screen literally blacks out. So if you're doing any sort of movement or whatever, it's something that you have to account for. Now, going into this, I knew that that was going to be the case. And again, I'm trying to treat this sort of like I would a medium format film camera. So as long as you don't have the expectations that it's going to work like your, modern mirrorless camera, I don't necessarily see it being an issue, but I feel like at least it's something that people who are considering buying this camera should know about. The autofocus on this as well is pretty subpar in my opinion. So you're not going to be ultimately looking for speed, but it's one of the reasons why I just decided to simply adapt lenses anyway. I'm used to manually focusing with both my Leicas and my medium format film cameras. So in treating it in that same way, I just decided to rock that, which also has saved me a lot of money. So kind of worked out in the end. So overall, I think this is a great camera. While not maybe a primary camera for many things, if you need a little bit more speed, it ends up being a really, really great sort of auxiliary camera for me. And I just love, love, love all of the images and the depth that I get out of it. So thanks so much for watching. If you're interested again in this camera, I will put links down below in the description as well as down in a pinned comment. If you have any questions about this, obviously I have plenty of videos and would love to answer anything. So leave a comment below. If you've made it this far, like and subscribe because it definitely helps out. And if you want to learn more about just medium format cameras in general, you can check out this video or this video. So thanks again. Thanks to everyone on Patreon for supporting me there. If you're interested, you can check out the link there. You can subscribe to me here, and I will see you all on the next one.